Hello everyone, it's Wendy De Rosa. This video is on why empaths attract narcissists, which is probably one of the top 3 questions that comes into me after Q&As and courses I teach. It's at least 5 people ask this question, so it is certainly an experience that people are having, and I'd like to explain it more. I also had a student ask, what is the difference between a narcissistic wound and the actual disorder. So I'm going to back up a bit to explain that, narcissism is certainly a spectrum, and when someone has narcissism as a disorder, what happens on the energetic level, and this is from the energetic perspectives, different than what might be described as a clinical. I'm not qualified to describe a clinical explanation, so I'll tell you what it looks like on the energetic body, which is that we have in the lower half of our body, we have our power centers that excuse me, we have our power centers that relate to how we engage in the world and how we survive on this planet and how we relate and exchange energy between ourselves and other people. In other words, how we have relationships with people and with ourselves. And that's a general kind of overarch of these lower 3 chakras, and then they go in more specifically. So in the first chakra area of the body, at the tailbone, is where we house our programming for our existence and our survival in the world. And a lot of that is what we have marinated in as a child, and it includes the belief systems and the conditioning and the life experiences that formed how we feel safe in the world. And what happens for someone who is brought up or ends up having a narcissistic profile is that they may be raised in an environment where their emotions weren't necessarily supported. Their sense of self or their confidence in themselves and their true sense of self wasn't necessarily supported, and it's possible that it was due to trauma. It's possible that there was a traumatic experience or complex trauma going on at a very young age for this individual. Maybe there was drinking, maybe there was neglect in the household, maybe there was an invalidation of the child's true experience and their emotions, and they never really got to recover from that experience, and instead started to develop ways of disconnecting from their true feelings to a point where feelings became a threatening experience. So feelings started to feel, that's not safe for me to engage in feelings, because when I did, I got punished. I got raged on. I got shunned. I got abandoned, in these feelings, when I had feelings. So feelings become a very threatening thing, and addressing authenticity and truth and true feelings at a very young age helps us develop our emotional maturity and our ability to be able to connect with people on an emotional level. Well, as we know, when we grow up and we get in those of us who've been in relationship with, perhaps someone who is a clinical narcissist, we know that territory is extraordinarily protected from someone who is a narcissist. That it is not safe to be vulnerable. It is not safe to express true feelings. It is not safe to intimately connect to that person, and the sense of importance comes from the inflation or the projection of self. I'm going to project myself so that you love me. I'll project myself so that you become, what I know you want. I can project, I'm making this up from first person. Let's say I project myself so that I become what the other person needs me to become, so that I'm safe. The true me is safe. And what will happen is that from that place, that the narcissist will override the people closest to them in order to be charismatic and receive love from out there, but the people closest to them see and intimately connect to them, see the worst, get the brunt of the worst, because they're in a threatening territory when it comes to authenticity and truth. And usually that's when the narcissist defenses come out. I'm going to defend and block and gaslight and protect from being the wrong one, the bad one, and then typically what will happen is that when they do get backed into a corner, they go into shame, or they go into self-pity, and yeah, you're right, I'm the bad guy, I'm the bad one. No one, they go into a victimized place. So that's sort of this profile here, and we could go on, and in fact, you probably are fully aware, and there's millions of books out there, thousands of books out there, and resources that you can read about the characteristics of narcissists, and being in relationship to one, and being a child of one. So here's where the distinction comes, is that someone who is raised by narcissistic parenting gets overlooked and can often build up within themselves initially some narcissistic tendencies. And some of those narcissistic tendencies might include incredible shame around emotions, not knowing it's okay to feel them, not having a sense of responsibility, personal responsibility, until they reach a certain point where the light bulb goes on and they start to realize, wait a second, I am starting to take personal responsibility for the things I've done that I'm not proud of, for the wounds I'm carrying. And it starts to become, and that's the turning point. The turning point is in personal responsibility. And that's where we start to understand the difference between someone who is a clinical narcissist and someone who has narcissistic wounds and tendencies. They may be the quote unquote victim of being raised by narcissism. And here's what's interesting, is that we're certainly we're in a collective time period, meaning every era, every generation brings in a new level of parenting and a new level of consciousness. So there are a lot of people who were raised in narcissistic parenting, because we call it that now, but back in the day, that's what it was. That's how you parented. Children were meant to be seen, not heard. That was common. And not dealing with your emotions, keeping everything safe and protected. There was a lot at stake for people who grew up in the Depression, or people who migrated from country to country, and survival was a big thing, and you did need to keep things under wraps, and things were stuffed down, and that was the era, and we can call that now, and out, let me say this, out of that era comes people who couldn't, parents, grandparents who didn't have space for themselves. And somehow, in some ways, they needed to find sideways ways to have space for themselves. That might have been alcohol. That might have been, escaping on some level, or having a coping mechanism that took their attention away from conscious parenting, which is more common now. We didn't have that terminology 50, 60, 70 years ago or more. So understand also that that time period and what was happening at the time does have a part in what we're calling narcissistic parenting. Where the difference is that for a narcissist who's clinical, it can be a trauma response in the body, and ultimately it comes down to brain chemistry. Some trauma has been set in at such a level that the person's brain chemistry has changed to where it doesn't fire. in their brain, they're in a completely altered awareness of life. And it's not that easy to say, can you take responsibility for what you just said to me, or you're projecting onto me? You know, it's not in their chemistry, in their brain chemistry. And it typically, the defenses and the survival mechanisms are so in place that it becomes very difficult for a narcissist to take responsibility and say, okay, I have a part in this, or I see what I'm doing. They're not necessarily able to self-reflect in the same way that someone who grew up with narcissistic parenting and has that ability to say, I now can see myself. That's a distinguishing factor sometimes. And it also, a clinical narcissist might not take themselves to therapy and take themselves to getting help and support because they're not the problem, quote unquote, from their lens. And that's another reason, and just to be clear, it's another reason why, a clinical narcissist can be difficult to diagnose from a therapeutic perspective, because, they're diagnosed by other people, by the social construct, not necessarily because they know, they're saying that they are. And so if there is awareness around narcissistic tendencies and personality, and effect on others, then most likely, and that they may not be like a clinical disorder. It may be that they're somewhere on the spectrum and they have trauma to work through and to heal. And if you're in relationship with one, then the deciding factor here for, the couple is, are they willing to see themselves, and are they willing to take responsibility on any level? And if there's a window into that, then there's a door into that. And if there's a door into that, then there's potential for healing in that. Now, why a empath might be related to or attracted to a narcissist is simply for these reasons, is that an empath is someone who has absorbed energy. Let me say this differently. An empath is someone who feels energy. An overly empathic individual is someone who absorbs the energy. There is a difference. So someone who is empathic and feels the energy around them and feels they take on the energy, it's happening because to the empath is someone who displaces, or let me say this, an overly empathic person is someone who displaces an aspect of their center. They've lost their center to a degree. Someone who's empathic can sit in their center and feel energy and be empowered in that. They can. Where we collectively get confused now that this word empath is so pervasive in the field is that an empath means I absorb the energy of others. And that's not really the true state of the empath. A empath who also has wounds in finding self and feeling self and honoring self, the empath who has a wound in that will absorb the energy. And where they get caught in this narcissistic and empathic dynamic is that an empath who has moved themselves out of their center and has made a priority of feeling other people's feelings and meeting other people's needs on an energetic level at the expense of their own will get into relationship with a narcissist because the narcissist is holding the power in the dynamic, and the empath is the overly empathic individual is used to that love, that profile, is used to that conditioning. That this person's emotions and state of being and their needs are going to be more important than mine, just like childhood, just like the old days. That's all I knew as a little individual, was to meet the needs of other people. And so when empaths are starting to become empowered and say, wait a second, I'm going to sit in my second chakra and own my feminine power, own my emotions. It's okay for me to have my feelings. And I'm going to let you stew in your own pasta sometimes. That's not for me to fix. Once we start to engage empowerment, you start to realize the narcissist doesn't like that very much. Doesn't, wait a second, you're not going to, I can't blast all over you, or you're not going to take care of my emotional needs. Well, then you're the bad one. That's what ends up happening in the dynamic. And yet what happens here, what I encourage for the empath, is that you still honor self. You still hold that center. It takes a while to shift a dynamic and allow a narcissist to take responsibility. And they can, if you are willing to take responsibility as an empath and say, this is my center. These are my true feelings. This is my voice. I have something to say. I have needs. I have gifts. I have wants and desires. This is me. And we make more space. The empath makes more space for themselves and their truth. And that will start to shift the dynamic. And from there, it's a relational thing, which means, and this is my perspective in truth, is that when it comes to relational, couples therapy is extraordinarily helpful. We can do our own work absolutely on a spiritual and soul level, an individual level, and we can certainly work on things on a relational level from an energy healing perspective. But once it gets into the realm of me and the other person, and working things out through dynamics and healing as dynamics as you're stepping into your power, that's a dynamic shift. And then it comes into, how do I now work with this individual in my life? That's where couples therapy can really, really help in shifting how you're relating as you're choosing to step into your power. Unless the two of you have the ability to work that out between yourselves. But I would say nobody's beneath external support. I mean, it's crucial, and it can be absolutely supportive in dynamics that feel like they're in crises and need extra help. So I hope this helps, and I hope this answers some questions. And again, if you are interested, I don't necessarily do programs specifically on narcissism, but certainly on empathic intuition, being an empath, and empowered in your intuition in general, not just with being an empath, but all the aspects of intuition. I teach healer trainings, training people in developing their intuition, and you can find that all at my website, schoolofintuitivestudies.com. Thank you so much.